Welcome to the Voyage podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Voyage podcast and our conversation on Batman. Today we're going to be talking specifically about the role of darkness in the spiritual life, which we kind of alluded to a little bit in part 1, as we were kind of just getting into it in general, what kind of motivated this episode, what are some of the general thoughts, ideas we had about the character, and now we wanted to kind of take a turn a little bit more theological. Right, Jacob? Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Man, that sounds great, Mike. I can't wait to dig into it.
Yeah, if only you had anything to say on this character and theology in general, right?
I know. I feel really out of my depth with this one. But I'm going to do the best I can.
Great. So I did make a reference to, and I'm going to refer to these things just because they are going to be available for listeners on our off weeks. So on the interim weeks between our conversations, we do release minisodes, which go through specific topics where I'm just kind of talking about that topic for about 20 minutes, diving into just one kind of key term, key concept that will actually be incorporated into our conversation. And I talked about apophaticism, which I think I just briefly mentioned in part 1. Do you kind of remember we were talking about just like that darkness, hiddenness sort of thing?
Yeah, I think so. We had just started to kind of scratch the surface, I think. I, more so than anything, remember just making veiled references to Rings of Power and laughing about it. But
yeah, well, now that we've gotten that out of our system.
Yeah, right. Hey, for the record, I did not dislike that show, everybody. I don't want to give the impression that I'm just dogging on the show. There's a lot of people who are, and I mean, I'm not saying it's the best thing I've ever watched, but I think it's getting criticized unfairly to some extent, except for that line. That line's ridiculous. So we can all agree.
But the fact that it had to bookend the entire season is probably what left a bad taste.
They really hinged.
Beginning and end. It's like they wanted that to be the kind of overarching.
It's like, hey, you guys remember that line that everyone hated from the beginning of the season? Let's just bring that back and hinge even more gravitas upon it. There's
been a lot said since the season finale of like what direction, since there's such a huge gap in between when season 2 is going to be released, it will be interesting. But excuse me, but is this a Rings of Power episode or a Batman episode?
I'm not the one still talking about it, Mike. I'm done,
So we were talking about, because I mean, you can't talk about Batman without talking about the role of darkness. And, you kind of gave me a hard time how I said the very cliched line of, it's like Gotham is a character. Well, if there's another non-personal entity in the Batman universe that's going to take on this sort of like personified character role, it's got to be darkness as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting point. People, because we're all so familiar with Batman, the mystique of his persona is kind of forgotten. We depend upon the interpretation you're looking at, I suppose, but he's meant to be a monster. He dresses like a monster. His goal is to strike fear into the criminal element. And, we lose sight of that. We lose sight of how important this kind of inversion is for how Batman operates. And it's got really interesting things to say to us as Christians, I think. Unfortunately, there's really...
Well, because there's a role of darkness in Christianity, right? Is that kind of...
Well, I think... Well, and so I'll be interested to see where you take this, Mike, because I can think of two separate, I don't know what you want to call them, categories of darkness. Mm-hmm. You mentioned apophaticism. And so that's going to be...
Yeah, we can talk about both, too.
And then there's... I don't want to derail kind of the direction you're going to go. So, in fact, why don't we just go ahead and go where you're going to take us? Because I could see a couple different ways this goes, but I don't want to guess. I just want to follow you where you're going.
Well, and I'm actually glad that you kind of brought that to light a little bit, because I think it is worth parsing out that when I say darkness, whether we're talking about the darkness that Batman kind of takes on, it's not necessarily moral darkness. It's not necessarily evil. It's talking about hiddenness, right? And that's where the apophaticism comes in. And whether we want to talk about how, like I said, he takes that on as part of his character. Like, he becomes one with the night, or he becomes one with darkness. Not only is it a tool for him to catch bad guys, not only is it a tool for him to stop evil because the bad guys are afraid of him, but it becomes who he is, like that he is hidden, and not just from the bad guys. This is why it's not a moral thing. He's hidden from the good guys too, right? And so
yeah, he's got like a hidden identity.
Well,
he's a masked
hidden identity. I mean, there's a
caped crusader,
and it's sort of become a whether we're talking about his alter ego and how nobody knows the real Bruce Wayne. Everybody only sees the kind of veneer, right? The billionaire playboy. But that's not the real Bruce Wayne, and why it's always so significant in any Batman iteration when he lets someone get close to him. Not just the Batman part, but the Bruce Wayne part. You know what I mean?
So why don't we go ahead and actually lay out what apophaticism is? And then once we've established kind of like how this plays theologically, why don't we see how that overlaps with what you're discussing here? It's an interesting conversation, kind of a different take, really. But let's go.
Yeah. So, and I do flesh this out more so in that mini-sode where we go into apophaticism and like the definition, the linguistic kind of part of it. Just really briefly, it's this idea of.
So if you guys don't hear enough, Mike,
yeah,
of Mike's talking already,
yeah,
there's more where that.
Then you don't have to
folks.
worry about Jacob, rudely cutting in every 5 minutes or so.
I'm still getting the hang of this podcasting thing. Of course, in real life, I just cut people off too. So.
So, but basically, it's this idea of you're not able to speak of this mysterious thing directly. You can only speak of, and this is used primarily in reference to God and the essence of God, where when philosophers and theologians, especially in the classical tradition, in the historic Christian tradition, when they refer to different aspects of God's nature, different attributes of God, it's not that they can speak positively of the attribute. It's more like they can speak negatively of it or say what it is not, what God is not, which is actually a phrase you'll see in a lot of Eastern Christianity, what God is not. And the apophaticism that has Greek roots, but you'll see in the Western Latin tradition, it's also referred to as the via negativa, or the way of negation. And they both are kind of referring to the same thing. But when you have this mysterious element, it's not ever that you can see it for what it is. And Christians would say, or Christian mystics would say, that there are plenty of reasons for that. But, well, I guess, I don't know if maybe that gives a little bit enough of the sort of what it is, and then how we're going to talk about how it kind of relates to the character or whatever too. But
well, I think so. I'm going to flesh that out just a hair though, for the people who are just completely unfamiliar with this idea. I actually had this conversation with my kids as early as I could. It's a kind of a weird concept, and so it's not like something you can go talk with your 7-year-old about necessarily. But, in our culture, we have a lot of, lots of different opportunities for people to make fun of this concept of a bearded dude hanging out on a cloud, right? And so early on, I introduced my kids to the appropriate Christian understanding of God, the concept of God. And the way to do that is through this apophatic or via negativa approach, because God is not best understood as an old man looking person hanging out in the clouds. I mean, I think a lot of that imagery comes from Old Testament prophecy stuff in Daniel and things like that. But the kind of way this developed, its understanding was approached, was whatever God is, we can't name that. The gulf between the creator and creation is so vast that anything that we try to ascribe to God at in his essence, couldn't possibly be something that we understand.
It's more unlike than it is like.
His mystery is beyond any created comprehension. So to say, you know, there's some, I'm trying to remember which saint says this, and I can't remember if I think it's a saint for both Catholics and Orthodox, but whatever, if God is, I am not. And if I am, God is not, is the phrase that was used. That's kind of getting at this apophatic thing. In other words, we can't even, in this way of talking, we can't even describe God as existing, because God is outside. He's supra-existence. He's above existence. Any existed terminology that we use is a attempt at us to describe him, and they can be helpful, right? It can be beneficial for us in our created state to help us understand his nature, but we'll never get to the mystery of his essence, that he's ultimately beyond comprehension.
Well, yeah, no. So I don't know if this is exactly the reference you were thinking of or alluding to, but there is something from St. Augustine. If you can comprehend it, then it's not God. So it kind of has the same sentiment of what you were describing, worded a little differently. And you know, who even knows with if the translation of Augustine is, you know, totally accurate, the one that I'm referring to or you are. But anyway, the sentiment is there either way. And yeah, actually, so this is referred, it's referred to, like you said, numerous church fathers. We have references to it in the Bible itself. I go into a little bit of the history of it. It actually has some pre-Christian origins. One of the most famous lines or sentiments that is at least put on the lips of Socrates, whether, you know, he said it or not, or anything like that, is the whole, I am wise because I know I'm not wise. And you can see how that speaks to that kind of apophatic understanding of, it's because I recognize the degree of mystery. It's because I know what I don't know that I actually know a very, very important truth. And it's the same thing when Christians and really classical philosophers talk about God, even when they say something like God is immaterial, which is just negative theology, it's without a body, or God is eternal because he's not in time. So you see that kind of negative, you know, like not talking about God directly or God's essence directly, but talking about the reverse of it. It's still saying something true, but there's a lot more to it than just what we're saying or what can be said.
Well, and the important reason for us to have this knowledge, this awareness of it's a statement about the limits that we have. It's not really a statement about the limits that God has, right? It's this acknowledging that we are talking about a mystery that it's not like a mystery that Sherlock Holmes could solve. It's a mystery that cannot be comprehended the way that an ant cannot comprehend the complexities of like the human brain. In other words, it's nothing against the ant. It's just that the ant is not such a creature that is capable of understanding. I mean, we're not, frankly, right? Like the human brain's still pretty mysterious even to us. Let alone, you know, if an insect tried to understand it. It's beyond.
Well, and even in that analogy, the ant is still closer to our brain than ours is to the infinite knowledge of God too. Or and you kind of gave the example, and I've used a similar sort of right, you know, and not that I've come. Obviously, it's Aquinas who, I shouldn't say obviously, it's Aquinas who gets a lot of credit for this, because in his fourth way for the existence of God. And one of the things when I talk to my students is that as valuable as these 5 ways of Aquinas are, not only do they point to the existence of God, they tell us an essential attribute of God. And his fourth way is the standards of being, where he talks about how, you know, like you were talking about in terms of existence, we're all existing things. Our existence is limited by this ground of being itself. But what if there was something that isn't just another thing on the number line, just another thing on the existence spectrum, but is the spectrum of existence, is the ground of existence? That's a qualitatively different thing than just a really, really big thing, like a really powerful thing or a really smart thing or whatever. But the actual standard of being by which all other things are real. And that's, getting you a little bit closer to what Christians, classical philosophers, theologians mean when they talk about God.
And this is all fairly self-evident when you really truly reflect upon what we mean when we talk about creation ex nihilo, something able to create existence being outside of existence. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. It doesn't take a, 3rd century.
Clearly, right?
a 3rd century Christian theologian to get to this point where it's like, oh, whatever God is, he's got to be way bigger or way other than anything that I can describe. So I was about to say, if we bring this back now that bring it back to Batman.
Go ahead. Please. I was going to say, it's almost been 10 minutes.
So anyway, I think it's an interesting thing to discuss Batman in light of apophaticism, because one place my brain goes is that there's this line in The Dark Knight, actually, right, where Alfred is talking to Bruce Wayne, and he's like, you got to know your limits, sir. And he says, Batman has no limits, right? And so what Bruce Wayne's character in those movies is kind of, especially in that middle movie, The Dark Knight, he's kind of referencing, there's this kind of philosophical conversation going on about the nature of the Batman persona as it's kind of being experienced by the people of Gotham and by Gotham City and things like that. And everything about who Batman is as a persona, as a figure in that movie, is something that transcends the limitations of everyone else, right? And everything that the Joker's trying to do is bring him down to our level, to mar this idea that you have this kind of transcendent being that's protecting the city and things like that.
Well, and just think of what he wants Lucius Fox to do with the whole, being able to see the entire city based off of, that's an omniscience that he's trying to create for himself. And obviously Lucius Fox has the right approach where this shouldn't be this unlimited, so to speak, or metaphorical unlimited knowledge shouldn't be within his grasp, even though he is the quote unquote good guy, right? That's the absolute power corrupting. But to your point, so much of that movie is all about the Batman transcending Bruce Wayne, right? Or Batman transcending the person. And that's just that was just the first example that came to my mind of why in that movie does he have the need to, this is where I need to see everything and not, one of the other iterations.
Yeah, he has to keep pushing. He has to keep pushing himself to become, and it's about Bruce Wayne creates this, we'll just say this kind of godlike, protector of the city kind of thing. How much can he inhabit that? How much can he embody, that kind of transcendent character that he has created for people? And the thing is it's very real in the minds of the populace, right? Where, there's a line early in the movie where it's like the bat signal goes up in the sky and there's some criminals about to exchange drugs or something like that. And the guy's like, no, I don't feel good about it tonight. And the other guy's like, there's no chance you're going to meet this guy. You have a better chance winning the lottery than meeting this guy. But he feels imminent. The character Batman still feels like he could be anywhere, right?
Yeah. And that's the darkness.
All right, so he's a ninja, right?
You've seen Batman Begins. There's certainly elements.
There is, and that's not just in the Nolan films, even in the comics, even in the animated series that we talked so much about. I
actually just saw that episode where he fought his former,
his rival. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say colleague, whatever. Yeah, they were both in the same dojo.
Mm-hmm. No, his trajectory as his training and things like that. I'm not sure the first time there's a reference to it being this kind of Eastern martial arts training, but he's definitely a ninja. And the Nolan films really literally portray that as such. But yeah, so his ability to inspire and I don't know, inferior people, it stems from him being cloaked in darkness. It stems in him being undefinable, like uncertainty, surrounds him, and that's the persona that he creates, so that people are always like these criminal elements, always kind of like on their heels.
Well, and you have the sense, and again, going to the Dark Knight movie specifically, but there's the sense of desire for participation in that. And you see it in kind of the two, like in a more positive sense, but also in the negative sense. If you remember the one guy who wants to almost like cosplay, wear the Batman outfit, and he gets captured and killed by the Joker, And so it's like, that's somebody who has that zeal, who wants to participate in the justice of Batman, so to speak, but is doing it in an ill-formed, kind of distorted way. And then you have Harvey Dent, who is doing it the right way, not because he's wearing the costume, but because he's actually trying to live out justice the way that justice needs to be lived out as the district attorney. Now, obviously, he gets corrupted and turned, and all that stuff, but you can, at least at the beginning, see how it's almost like like a communion of saints sort of thing, where it's like they both want to participate in it. One is doing it in a, like I said, ill-formed or distorted way, but the zeal is there. The other one is starting off doing it in the right way, but falls away.
So as you were talking, the first thing that popped into my head when you brought up the hockey pads guy is it goes back to so much of what apophaticism does for Christianity is cut away the chaff of like delusion, right? Where people are trying to make these affirmative statements about God and trying to like square certain circles, and it leads to a corruption of who God is. And so you always have to go back to what he's not. And so in this case, God's not wearing hockey pads, right?
Yeah,
like
it's not about the costume.
When people,
it's not about the gadgets.
Right. When people, that guy, he's like a heretic Batman. He's like someone who exactly. has seen Batman, or his interpretation of Batman, and now
misunderstands
he's trying to
the point of the gear and the gadgets, when that's not really the point. It's the justice. That's what Harvey Dent gets.
And I dare say he probably couldn't understand all that fancy tech stuff anyway, because he doesn't really come across as the type of person who is capable of knowing all that.
That's just it's a misplaced zeal, right? I mean, zeal is a virtue, but it's not the end all of virtues.
And so here's the thing: who do you? And then this actually goes. We can go many places with this, but if you want to know Batman, if you want to be on the same wavelength as Batman, you don't do it by trying to define Batman or trying to figure out what Batman looks like and then kind of putting on those hockey pads or whatever. You do it by being like Batman, right? So the people that Batman has in his life, the people who are closest in his inner circle, are always people that are his kind of partners in crime fighting, right? Now, that's not everybody. There's people like Commissioner Gordon who, depending upon where you're at in the comic line and things like that, there's a distance between. You could consider Commissioner Gordon like a righteous pagan or something like that. Like he's maybe we're stretching the analogy too much, but like
I was going to say, to take this back to Tolkien didn't want people allegorizing the Lord of the Rings, and it's like, do you think that what is the impression going to be when you over allegorize Batman in all these different areas? I mean, I'm all for it. But
if Commissioner Gordon is a part of the system, right, that needs to be saved, pagan. He's a part of the world that's corrupted and has no power to save itself, right? But he's like the righteous pagan, but he still doesn't have that personal knowledge of who Batman is. And then you have characters in Batman's life, like Barbara Gordon or the various Robins that have come in or whatever, or Alfred the Butler and things like that. These people are the people who are walking with Batman, who are living with Batman and living the life of Batman and things like that. I think that's, this is all a little cheesy. I acknowledge that it is, but we're geeks and it's fun to nerd out about stuff. And so, you don't know Batman unless you fight alongside Batman and unless you train with Batman. Otherwise, you're always just going to be Commissioner Gordon, wondering where he went every time he turns his back,
Oh, he hates when he does that.
It's, the analogy just keeps lending itself,
Well, see, Commissioner Gordon he never sees him face to face. He always sees him at his back, just like Moses.
That's right.
So that's that pre-Christian revelation.
That's true.
No, I was actually, to kind of continue on your point, it kind of reminds me of at the end of the Dark Knight Rises, where you have, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character who kind of takes the mantle, so to speak. And it's only because he has entered into it, right, and participated not as a cosplayer, not as I want to, get the attention or the glory that Batman was getting. It was precisely because he entered into the rejection, right? Because he's the one who he was trying to fight the system or whatever, and you see him numerous times throughout the Dark Knight Rises where he's like getting rejected. His desire for justice is being thwarted, and it's going through that period of purification or purgation that he then is able to kind of pass through into and then take up that mantle, right?
Well, yeah. So he's contrasted with the hockey pads guy, right? Like he's not LARPing at being Batman. He's actually just trying to follow Batman's kind of example. He's trying to fight injustice the way Batman fights injustice, but he doesn't think that means that he can be Batman. That he like is Batman. He doesn't know. Well, actually, I take that back. He does know who Batman is in that movie. But, in theory, he's not trying to pretend he's Batman. He's just trying to do what Batman would want him to do, right? And in so doing, that's his final reward, is to be Batman, right? And so, again, this is all, really, really riding the cheese train here. But, it's actually a really, really good analogy for the Christian walk.
Well,
right?
that actually...
Where
No, go ahead, sorry.
I'm not Jesus. I'm not Jesus, right? But I know what Jesus wants me to do, and I know what Jesus is trying to do for us and for the world. He's given us everything we need to know through himself and through his church and through all the tools that he provides us, quote unquote, the wonderful toys. I don't know if we should call sacraments wonderful toys, but they're wonderful,
Well, and this actually kind of segues into the second part of these kind of apophaticism, darkness, mystery, which one of the saints in the Western tradition, he was a mystic, he's a doctor of the church, so one of the most important teachers in Catholic theology is St. John of the Cross. And one of St. John of the Cross's main ideas in his poetry and theological writing is the dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul is kind of what you were describing, using kind of the Batman metaphor, Batman analogy of you pass through this way of purification, the way of the purgative way. And that's where all things that are not love of God. So it's even, it's when you have to even turn away from the love of God's gifts for the sake of God, that you can't be so obsessed with the gifts, that you can't be so fixated on the gifts that God gives you, whether it's the consolations or whatever the case may be, and that all of that is being stripped away ultimately for love of God alone. And it's after that so that's like the first stage of the 3 stages. Then you enter into the illuminative stage, which, again, that's when you start to know God more deeply beyond the level of just the way of negation, but you can actually start to enter into a positive knowledge of God. And it's through that illuminative way that, and this is what very few saints, very few mystics have experienced in this life, but it's what all the saints experience in the next life, is called the unitive way, where you're entering into because you now have been purified of all things that are not love of God, you now know God better, and by knowing God better, you can be more fully united to God, right, through love. And so we see that, that's the process that the individual Christian, like you were describing, every Christian is supposed to follow in that footstep. We all experience the three ways, right? To whatever degree that happens in this life or in the next life, and what, historic Christianity calls purgatory. And I know the Eastern Church doesn't standardize it as well, but they certainly have a tradition of praying for those who have died, having some sort of purification, whatever anybody wants to call it.
Yeah, there's corollaries. I mean, there's definitely corollaries.
The word purgatory just means place of purification, so it's not really that much of an issue. But why it's so important that John of the Cross describes it as a dark night of the soul is precisely because you don't necessarily see the end of the tunnel, so to speak. Right? It's not like the light of faith is flipping on a light switch and you get to see all the way down to the end. It's more like you have this candle and you only see the 5 feet in front of you and behind you as you walk through.
Yeah, it's interesting. If we go back to the journey that, the Nolan movies do with Batman. Spoiler alert, everybody. If you haven't seen these movies yet, it's been a long time, man, and they're like the best movies ever.
It's been like 10 years.
Pause this podcast and go watch the Dark Knight trilogy. But what I said last,
almost as good as the Lego movie.
Almost. I think I said last time. I guess I should have said spoiler alert last time too. But it's the only happy ending I've ever seen Batman get in any medium ever, depending upon how you want to define Batman's happiness. Right? Some people might say his only happiness is like beating up bad guys, but if you take a more humanistic approach and believe that Batman's sense of satisfaction comes from peace and love and finding the things that we all want in our hearts, he gets that at the end of the Dark Knight trilogy, after dying, and then once he's gone through this kind of like ascesis, this lifetime of renouncement of all of his material goods. He gives everything up at the end. He sacrifices himself at the end.
He wanted to be perfect, so he sold everything.
It's literally kind of how it plays out. It's how it plays out.
It's parable of the rich young man, isn't it? Yeah.
Then he kind of finds love with this other lost soul out there, Anne Hathaway's Catwoman character. Oh
my gosh, I just thought of, the whole other motif in Batman is his mom's pearls, and I was like, she tries to steal him at the beginning. She's the pearl of great price.
What?
Oh my gosh. See, you thought you were getting cheesy? I can always stop it.
Yeah, we could probably do a whole lot about those pearls and that whole great price analogy. But, he I don't know how far I want to push it, but he finds peace. He finds peace after the life that he had led. And it's not a materialism. It's not a kind of, he doesn't go back to being rich. We're not really given what his life looks like after his death, and that's probably appropriate for this analogy. But we know that he finds happiness. He finds happiness and he finds community and love. But it's only after he's purged of everything.
And, what's actually, that makes me think, this is coming from that movie, it's called The Dark Knight Rises, right? And when you start to bring all this together, we're talking about this emptying or even this lowering, right? This idea that he is removing from himself and he's entering downwards and all that type of thing. That's where all this kenosis kind of implies. But the movie's title is rising, right? And so now we're getting into this idea, this Christian idea that to empty oneself is to elevate oneself.
Well, in the same way that Bruce Wayne had to, in a sense, empty himself for the Batman to rise, it's almost like repeating that, but now it's the Batman emptying himself, or Gotham emptying itself of Batman, and then Gotham is the thing that rises.
Well, yeah, and so that's interesting, because where I was going to go with this is, at the end of the movie, he's with Catwoman, right? And we had just been talking about how, the Pearl of Great Price stuff or whatever. This isn't exactly the perfect continuation of that thought, but again, we like to stretch analogies. We've established that she is kind of the bride of the Bat, right? I mean, and this is played out, certain iterations, Catwoman literally marries Bruce Wayne, and other iterations they come close, but they always have that kind of
will they
Sam
or won't
and Diane.
they? I was
will
going to say
they,
Ross
won't
and
they
Rachel.
thing.
But...
Ross and Rachel, yeah, that's the generational difference.
So,
right there.
so would you actually call it a Bruce and Selena instead of a Ross and Rachel then?
Oh, you totally could. You totally could. But we all know at the end of the day, they end up together and live happily ever after, Mike. That's the appropriate end. But anyway, at least in The Dark Knight Rises, that is how it works out, right? And so you get this idea where, I have no idea where this is going. I don't know if this is actually apropos, but what if Selena Kyle in this analogy is kind of like the bride of Christ, that now that Batman has emptied himself, now he is elevated into, let's say, happiness, right? Like he's purged himself of everything, but he brings Catwoman with him. And Catwoman, that entire movie, is looking for the clean slate, right?
Yeah.
She's looking for the expungement of her sins.
Oh, see, she's the woman caught in adultery now. See, that's who Selena Kyle is.
But isn't that the church as well?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. But there again,
So,
I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and, because that's, in a sense, you think of, and again, it's, maybe this is getting too cheesy or stretching it too far, but Gotham is kind of like the new Israel too. I mean, it's the new Jerusalem, or it's the Jerusalem in the Book of Revelation. And so it's not is it Selena or Gotham? It's just like it's not Mary or the church. It's Mary and the church, sort of thing. So
sure.
Yeah, it kind of works. I mean, you could look at it in either way. It kind of fulfills both of those.
Well, and that's how it plays out in Scripture, obviously, and how the kind of theology of all this plays out. It is interesting to think about the idea of Gotham rising. The idea, and I'm trying to kind of recollect how those things play out. They erect the statue of Batman, and suddenly you have this almost, let's call it like a religious icon, They
already had their iconoclasm with Harvey Dent too. They had to get that torn down. They had the iconoclasm,
or tearing down the bat signal and things like that, right at the end. So now they're erecting these visual references to the spirits that's going to elevate the city, right, and things like that.
And if anybody thinks that we are taking this way too far, think of the apocalyptic language and imagery that's used in The Dark Knight Rises, especially with how they were going to cleanse Gotham, and how are they going to do it? By destroying it with that nuclear bomb. And so you have this apocalypse, purged by fire, all that sort of imagery is playing right into this. And so, in one sense, this isn't just like Jacob and Mike going off the deep end because we love Batman and we love the apocalypse or Christianity. It's almost like it just falls right into place, so to speak, sort of.
No, it does. I mean, like this is being made up on the spot, right? It's not like that's
buy my
Mike
book.
Mike likes to
buy my book.
Mike tries to have a plan for these things, and I pat him on the head and say good luck. But it's just thinking these things through. Every now and again, I'm sure we'll always be doing this, is casually referencing someone like Jonathan Pageau, that Orthodox iconographer who talks about symbolism all the time. But one of his little pet phrases that's become really prominent is just symbolism happens, right? And so this whole point of this podcast is
you forgot to introduce him as future fan of the show, though. That's the
he's future. Where's this future? Come on, he's already a fan. I know that. Jonathan, give me a call. But symbolism happens, and this whole point, as we've talked about before, is you can go ahead and just look into these stories, look into these characters, and identify all of this richness from a Christian perspective. And that's what you should do. Or just throw it all out. Because if it doesn't have this content in it, if it doesn't have this application in it, then it's probably not the type of stuff that you should be paying attention to. And I just, we have the luxury of not having to do that.
Well, and that's what this whole, going back to our origin story episode, that's what this whole thing is about, is it's not us imposing this. This is us extracting what's already there.
Discovering
We're finding
it.
Yeah. And so if you just want to call it true, good, and beautiful and not, feel like you're superimposing the Christian elements, look, fine but it's there whether you like it or not. And how much of that imagination was implanted into the minds of the producers, director, author, whatever. In one sense, it's been implanted by their human nature that seeks the transcendent, but in another, and again, you could see it as arbitrary, like, oh, grew up in a Catholic home, grew up in a Orthodox home, Christian home, whatever, but it still is coming out, it's still showing.
Mm-hmm. And it's not like it's I don't know. You could attempt to deny it, I guess, but it's funny. I I will say this: I have never ever thought I would ever compare Catwoman to the church, and yet here we are. So
in a specific context, right? In a specific, yeah. Because and there again, like, even when I wasn't even saying it to contradict when I said, well, the woman caught in adultery, and you're like, well, isn't that the church? And it's like, yeah, exactly. John knew, the author of the Gospel of John knew what he was doing in putting that story in there. There's a reason why there's only 7 signs put throughout the whole Gospel, because they all had a very specific purpose, and they were all packed with meaning. It wasn't like it was just a one-to-one analog sort of thing.
I gotta say, because I sense that this conversation is kind of like wrapping up and all that. How did we go this entire episode talking about this subject matter and not bring in the fight with Bane in the darkness? How has that not come up yet?
In the pit,
and then when
yeah.
and the classic, I was born from the darkness. Because you adopted the darkness, but I was born to it, and it's like that language. Are we gonna just we're just not gonna comment on that? We're talking about Batman being this kind of like Jesus-like figure where he adopts the flesh. He incarnates and becomes one of us or whatever. Then the big bat.
We're gonna bring that back when we talk about Beowulf, because Beowulf is all about going down into the depths, and going into it's a Holy Saturday. It's a Holy Saturday episode. That's what we gotta wait for. Holy Saturday episode is when we go into that pit.
So you're talking about the classic Beowulf Batman episode that every podcast is legally obliged to host.
Is that honestly? Is that really a thing? Everybody does Beowulf and
No,
Batman?
that's not a thing. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about Batman now, Mike. Why are we going to talk about Batman when we're talking about Beowulf?
Well, because we're going to talk about the going into the underworld, to Sheol, and so you're going to see that in Beowulf. You see that in Batman. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about Dante too, right? So we can save our Batman going into that prison, into that pit, when we go into the Sheol episode.
Hey, you know what? You do you, Mike. I was just trying to give the guys what they wanted, the folks out there in entertainment land. We were about to have this really, really incredible conversation about this moment in that movie.
And we're at time.
Yeah. Yeah, well, okay. Well, all right. Mike sees a party pooper, so very well.
Look, you got to keep them coming back, right? Wanting more and all that stuff. So
just string them along. That's Mike's motto.
There's
string them along.
Yeah, very disrespectful of the viewers, of the fans, who love us so much. By the way,
I think they're starting to get the pattern. Sure.
Yeah. You know what? If we have, there'll probably be something where there's some sort of promo, and they'll say, like, put in this code for Mike, put in this code for Jacob, and then we'll see who everybody likes more.
Vote with your dollars, folks.
Yeah.
Send your money. Let's set up a GoFundMe, and if you like me more, pay me money, and if you like Mike more, you can pay him money.
When Voyage will have some product of something we mentioned, and it'll be like, put in this promo code, and whatever one gets more, it'll be the same discount, right? But then we really can see who the more popular one is.
Okay.
So
you still. Okay. I was just talking about no fuss, direct compensation from my army of loyal listeners I don't know why we got to bring Voyage Comics into this.
Gosh.
I mean,
Yeah, why would we do that?
why would we do that?
I just want
What do
Phil
they have to do with this podcast?
I just want Phil and Mike Lavoie to know that was Jacob who said that. Who said, why would we bring Voyage into this? So you have the recording, and it was Jacob who said that.
Hey, let's talk compensation next time, folks.
Yeah. No. Oh boy. I thought this would go longer. See, you want to tease. I want to tease future episodes. You want to get us canceled before we can even do them. So,
I've been fairly, out in the open about my intentions for this podcast, just in a very Joker-esque way. I'm just want to watch the world burn. Like, just want to watch the world burn.
See, and I thought you thought the world needed a better class of podcasts. I thought that's what this was about. If we're gonna make Joker references.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah, we want to thank. I mean, I guess we really want to thank everybody for actually listening to maybe these last 10 minutes or so. We want to thank you guys for coming to listen. We, as you can tell, we really enjoy whether it's talking about Batman, talking about just some of the deeper themes, the deeper Christian themes and symbols that we can see in that, and any of these sorts of things that come up. I want to especially thank, and we haven't done this enough, and we're definitely going to do this more, thank Manny, our producer and editor, for having to put up with all of the sound things, mixing the sound, making it sound nice and everything. And I'll speak for myself personally. I think Jacob does a pretty good job. So we want to thank him for that. And yeah, just that, come in if you want to hear more, like, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating so we can keep getting this podcast out there, sharing it with others. And yeah, we just look forward to talking with you, talking about just any of these sorts of stuff again. Yeah, see you later.
Love you, Manny. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.